one. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Hockey Podcast. My name is Kevin Woodley. You can follow us on Twitter at podcast_hockey. Subscribe on iTunes and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Like us on Facebook as well, the Hockey Podcast. Busy day today. Sean is with me. Hello, Sean. How are you?
Hello, Kevin. I'm good, thank you.
Good. Sean, I think we have a guest today.
Yeah, we do. We've got Kevin Woodley from In Goal Magazine and writing for NHL.com as well.
Hello, Kevin. How's it going?
It's good. I really appreciate you guys reaching out with the invite. I'm excited.
Great. I am too. And lots to talk about here in terms of where we're at in terms of the goaltending. And I'm curious, one of my theories right now that I've been working on is in terms of this pause and play in and where we're at, is it tougher right now or different for the goaltenders than it would be for the other players on the team, or is it the same?
I think it's different. I mean, at the end of the day, like we say this all the time in the goalie world, like it's almost like we're playing a different sport in a lot of ways. Like just the movements, everything, like it's a sport within a sport. So yeah, I think it is different. I think there are elements of rhythm and timing and feel that obviously matter for players as well, but it seems to me that it matters a little more for goaltenders. And so being able to find those parts of your game that make you comfortable quickly and at a level of playoff intensity is, you know, in such a unique circumstance might be a little tougher. And at the same time, then again, like, you know, now that I think of it from a player side, being able to ramp up, there's a reason it takes half a season to get to that level of intensity and the physicality and the battle level and the boards and all the things that we associate and love about playoff hockey as a player. It takes a while to get there. So, you know, maybe I think it would be harder for goalies, but maybe players are going to, especially physically and withstanding, you know, the rigors of that type of hockey on a short turnaround at a training camp. Maybe we'll see players dropping like flies. But I always side. The goalie union says I have to say it's harder for
goalies. Fair enough. And in terms of the preparation, what have been what are the kind of the challenges or the good things, or I guess both good and bad, that you're hearing from the goalies right now in terms of where we're at?
Well, I'll be honest. My opinion on who is going to come out of this the best or the quickest and get back to their peak performance the fastest has kind of changed as this has gone on. When it first started, and obviously we didn't know how long it would go. I think when we first went into the pause, I think a lot of us thought this might be a month and a half kind of thing. And I thought a lot of the young goalies that that work in their off season, like they never sort of stop working. They might take a couple weeks off. But like these are the guys who in a typical offseason, they're back on the ice by June. They're always doing off-ice stuff. And by off-ice stuff, I don't just mean bigger, stronger, faster training. I mean like mental training, concentration grids, working with NeuroTracker. They're never off, so to speak. They don't disconnect from the game. Guys like Carter Hart, and he was kind of I hate to keep throwing him out as the prime example, but if you look at Carter's first 2 seasons in the league, both years he's had significant injuries, not huge injuries, but he's missed time, like a month, a good block of time. And both times he came back and was just rockets out of the gate, good. And that's because Carter doesn't turn it off. Like when he can't go on the ice and work on his physical game, he goes into what his trainer, John Stevenson, or his longtime personal, brain trainer would call his mind gym. And he does that type of work. And so for the first month and a half, I thought those types of goalies were going to be the ones that came out of this and just ready to go versus the, total amateur move. I didn't turn my do not disturb. Sorry, guys. I should know better.
All good.
The big beep in the middle of it. The total amateur. Those guys, I thought they would be the best. And then there were your other class of let's call them the Carey Prices and the Braden Holtbys, both guys that we've actually had on as webinar guests for our audience at In Goal Magazine during this pause. They've come and joined us in live Zooms like this with our audience. It's been really cool. And talking to those guys, they tuned out. Like Carey was in Washington State at his wife's place with his family the whole time, didn't even bring his gear down. And I heard that, and I talked to these guys, and I thought, man, like if we come back in a month and a half, are you going to be able to ramp it up? Like, you know, that wouldn't necessarily be a guy, despite all that incredible talent, that I would have picked to come out of the gates fast. But as we've gotten to 3 months, and guys like Carey and Braden, they don't hit the ice till August, right? Like, so they're used to completely checking out of the game. And then, boom, check back in, get on the ice in August, you know, do some of your off-ice work, do some of your on-ice work in terms of drills and your structure. But mostly, like in Carey's part, he just plays like high-level shinny. Now, shinny up at Kelowna, I've been out at those skates, and it's like an all-star game out there. But that's what he does. And as we've kind of gotten into this 3-month window, and guys like that have been off, now I'm starting to tip the scales a little bit. Like, is Carey going to be better? Is Braden Holtby going to be better? Because he's the same type of guy than these kids who, like, for a month, yeah, Carter could stay engaged mentally, but now we're into 3 months. And now a kid who his whole life has never spent that much time off the ice has been off the ice for 3 months. So my answer is kind of shifted. At the end of the day, we don't know. We're guessing. But I've been talking to some of the goalie coaches that are working with these guys. And you know, Braden in particular, like he feels good right now. He feels really good right now. Body's rested. This is normal for him. And so there's also a confidence element. If I'm a goalie that always worked most of the summer, like took maybe 2-3 weeks off and then went back to work, that's how I built my confidence for a season. That's how I know I'm ready to go when the puck drops. If I'm a goalie that's always taken 2 or 3 months off and then ramped up, that's in the back of my mind. That's what I do. And right now, that's the guy that feels comfortable. The guy that has been off the ice way more than he's got to now create in his mind, like, I can do this. The guy like Carey or Hope is like, I've been doing this for 15 years, same routine, right? Maybe a little bit quicker in terms of, you know, August 1st to training camp would be a month and a half. This is going to be more, you know, phase 2 to training camp could be 3 weeks and right into games and intensity. But again, they have that sort of been there, done that. No problem. I got this, right? So my answer shifted. Whether I'm going to be right, who knows? But I'm starting to lean towards some of these vets.
Sean?
And a lot of these vets have had were high mileage goalies that started a lot of games, and we've seen the NHL go towards more of a 1A 1B system in terms of number of starts throughout the regular season. Other than some notable exceptions, especially Freddie Anderson in Toronto. Do you expect those normally overly taxed goalies are going to benefit from this layoff?
I would think so, especially, I mean, you know, by the time we shut things down in mid-March, nobody's healthy, right? Like, health is a relative thing. Everybody's nicked up a little bit. You're not 100%. You look at, you know, you mentioned Freddie Anderson for sure. Guys like Carey as well. Connor Hellebuck, right? Just an absolute workhorse this year. Probably should. I mean, I think he will and should win the Vezina just based on, you know, quality of play, but even more so the workload that he managed. Guys like that should benefit from the rest. You know, for the most part, I don't think anybody had major injuries. Then you look at like a guy like Jacob Markstrom. I mean, he was getting ready to come back from injury anyways. And so even more rest for a knee that was surgically repaired. Maybe minor surgery, but still surgery nonetheless. I got to think that, you know, for the most part, everybody comes back at a sort of level reset playing field. You know what I mean? Like those factors matter less in terms of being worn out and ground down. And the other interesting thing is in terms of how they come back. I mean, with no other benchmark to compare, I think you got to look at historically, especially the guys who've been at the league. How did they come out of the gates? And we remember Roberto Luongo here in Vancouver. You know, the joke was always like, if he could just delete October, he'd win the Vezina every year, right? Like October was just a nightmare for him. And it became something that, you know, I don't know if it got into his head, but like for sure it was something he talked openly about and clearly thought about. So I think you do have to kind of look at history. Like in Calgary, I'm thinking David Rittich. Like to me, the only thing that separates David Rittich from being, you know, mentioned in the same name as same vein as a lot of these like high end starters is he can't seem to keep it up. But for the first half of the last 2 seasons, this guy's been really good, performed at a really high level. And so if you're the Calgary Flames and you get that guy back out of the gates, you're looking pretty good, right? So I do think that history is something that, and to be honest, I haven't dug into it on a case-by-case basis yet. I'm kind of waiting until we get to camp, and that's a story I've got, queued up to do a little more research on. But I do think your historical starts, because again, it's an indicator. I feel comfortable at the start of the season. Now, will it hold over because, hey, I haven't been able to do the same work I normally do? I'm not sure. But I do think at a time when there's so much uncertainty, you just look for signposts along the way that might have sort of some relevance to this situation. And how a goalie comes out of the gate, I think is one you'd certainly look for. And like I said, if you're the Flames, you're loving that if you got David Rittich coming back.
Right, and then if you have Talbot, who has playoff experience, you do have that. If he falters, you have that anchor to go back to, I guess.
Yeah, and do you get Cam Talbot back playing the way he was down the stretch? Because as good as David Rittich started, Cam Talbot was that good down towards the end, right? So it's tough. This is you mentioned, Sean, the 1A, 1B, right? That is where we're headed. And take a look at. I mean, I know it's 2014, so the sample size is a lot bigger. But how many of those are you absolutely locked in on one guy as your starter? How many question marks are there? And I don't have the answer to this in terms of how they're going to handle it, but coaches are going to be faced with tougher decisions. Guys have less time to sort of get comfortable. There's not as much training camp. Training camp's actually going to be, because let's be honest, training camp nowadays is 3 days and straight into the preseason, normally. So there's a fair window there. You're going to have to be able to judge and trust your goaltender's performance without getting to see it in games. You're going to have to rely on practice. I would be interested to see if a lot of teams start to scrimmage, if they've got camps of 28, in order to get more of that game feel and be able to get a read on how their guy looks and feels in that game type environment. Because really tough decisions. How long do you let a guy play through what might just be an early hiccup? How quickly do you go to the hook? There are so many more factors this year at a time when we've never seen, to me, the 1A, 1B thing, there's multiple reasons for it. The idea that a workhorse doesn't necessarily perform at his best in the playoffs, that's not new. That's not new at all. You can go back to early 2000s and there were evidence of that. We found guys way back then winning the cup with lower workhold thresholds. That pattern has been there. What's changed is the gap between starter and backup has decreased in a lot of situations to the point where that option is more relevant. It didn't matter before if running your guy into the ground would mean he's not as good in the playoffs if you can't get to the playoffs because you don't have a good B option. The amount of good B options has never been better. And as that gap between starter and backup has shrunk for the most part around the league, it just makes sense to play them more, play both of them more often. But what it means in terms of this really unique environment heading to the playoffs, I don't know. And I think that relationship with the goalie coach and the head coach is going to be more important than ever, because the goalie coach is the guy who knows what it looks like when his goalie's playing well. This can't just be, because you can have 2 really quick bad bounces and be really tempted to yank a guy if you're a head coach. And if you're a goalie coach, you're just no. It's not that he played it right, but he played it how he normally plays it. I watch, you can watch a puck go in, and if the goalie didn't change anything, I've said this about Jacob Markstrom, actually. I didn't like his game before he came to Vancouver, frankly, and was kind of public about it. They changed him once he got here, right? They changed a lot of elements of his game. But I always pointed, because we can never tell as analysts what he's got between the ears. You look again for signposts, right? You don't know whether the guy's mentally strong, but you look for examples. Jacob Markstrom gets thrown into the World Cup because Henrik Lundqvist comes up sick at morning skate in Toronto, the last World Cup we had. Markstrom goes into that game, plays really well, they win. To me, I didn't love his game. There were elements of his game that I didn't love, but he didn't change them under pressure. He still played his game. And so a goalie coach is going to be able to recognize that. is this guy choking? Like, there's going to be a lot of first-year playoff guys who have had success, but this is their first taste of playoffs. And if a couple go in early, you might have a head coach going, oh, this guy can't handle the moment. But the goalie coach is able to say, no, he's playing the way he always plays. He either just got beat or a puck bounced, but I don't see him deviating his style, how I want him to play. Keep going with him. Sergei Bobrovsky last year, right? Like, how many people were calling for him to get yanked after the first period against Tampa Bay? How many people saw the Jackets upsetting Tampa Bay in 4 straight after that first period, right? If you had panicked, do you get there? Probably not, because there was a big narrative around Sergei Bobrovsky going into those playoffs that he hadn't gotten it done in the postseason. And that narrative, everyone, I mean, Twitter was just blowing up about, here goes Bob again, right? But if you're able to step back and analyze it as a goalie coach and say, okay, like, it wasn't a great period, but there are elements here, like he's not panicking. He's not chasing the puck. He's playing his game, and it just happened to go in. Let's stick with them. Those are going to be massive decisions this year, even bigger than before. And I think your goalie coach is best qualified to make them.
Yeah, and also with this being a best of 5 for the play-in, that decision becomes even more magnified, because if it's wrong and you're down 1-0 and you're down 2-0, it's harder. It's going to be harder to come back, and that panic button will hit more, I think, too, which makes this more of a bigger significant strategy decision, I think.
I totally agree. But at the same time, too, all the questions that you have about your number 1 guy exist on the number 2 guy, right? Like, if you're down early and when you're like, I got a really good backup, do I throw him in? Well, you also don't know how he's going to be. Like, you don't have as good a read as you normally do. It's the Cam Talbot, Dave Rittich thing, right? Like, which guy am I getting? Second half Cam or first half Dave? And if I get first half Cam and second half Dave at the same time, I might be in trouble.
Right.
Especially going up against Connor Hellebuck.
Yeah, Helly's, he's going to win the Vezina. He deserves to win the Vezina. One of the things that's interesting about his season is, like, he led, when I look at I have access to, I get to look under the hood at Clearsight Analytics, which is the analytics company run by Stephen Valiquette. As far as I'm concerned, nobody has sort of a deeper dive on shot quality than what he does. But that said, I don't have a peek under the hood at some of the other places like Sportlogic. But when I look at some of the things they measure and rely on, things like passes into the slot and things like that, I think there are deeper layers of information in the numbers that Steve has that, when I look at the success rate of sort of the repeatability and where their expected goals model hits out, it seems to, it works for me. Again, I'm not a data scientist, so I understand there is skepticism about private black box numbers, but I trust these ones. And when you look at Hellebuck's season, he's the only goalie in the NHL to have more goals saved. They call it goal differential, positive goal differential, goals saved on the season than Jacob Markstrom is Connor Hellebuck. But he did it in he saw a lot more chances. And when you look at his actual adjusted save percentage in terms of, when you break it down shot by shot, including the shot quality, Hellebuck grades out more like 4th or 5th. Like, not bad, hell of a season, hell of a goalie. But 4th or 5th in terms of adjusted save percentage. A guy like Markstrom and Rask and Jordan Binnington are ahead of him on that scale. When you look at, I think that there's a narrative one too for me. What's the narrative surrounding the Winnipeg Jets this year and their defense and their defensive play and Connor Hellebuck?
Well, they lost all their defense in last time.
So they lost their entire right side. They lost Myers to free agency, Bufflin to, I don't know, what do we call it, retirement, indifference. And that's actually not a shot at him. I love Dustin Bufflin. And they traded Jacob Trouba because he had no intention to resign. So they lost their entire right side. So we would expect that they were not good defensively and that everything was on the back of Connor Hellebuck. And Connor Hellebuck was good. Like, don't get me wrong. Will win, deserves to win the Vezina Trophy. But when we talk about this defensive environment he played in, behind, it actually grades out in terms of expected save percentage. And I'm just going to click off something here to make sure that I actually have the exact right number in front of me. It grades out, his expected save percentage actually grades out around 30th in the NHL. Now that is just trying to get the total number. Like that's out of 80. So that's out of all of them. It's not like he's 30th out of 31. I'm including all the goalies. Tuukka Rask is 35th. Jacob Markstrom, in terms of expected save percentage, is around ninth hardest in the league. So the narrative that Connor Hellebuck, they lost their entire right side, so he must, again, it's not that he wasn't good, but the narrative that his defensive environment must have been terrible because of that doesn't actually hold water. It actually wasn't much worse in terms of his expected save percentage than Tuukka Rask. Like, he was 31st, Hellebuck's was the 31st hardest, Rask was the 35th hardest environment. And we think of Tuukka as playing like, Tuukka got to play behind the Bruins. What a great defensive environment. So again, when you actually look at the numbers and get to see some of the proprietary stuff, this narrative that the Jets D suck, they may have not been the names you knew, and they may have given up a lot of chances. When you weight those chances to the quality of them, it's not like Connor Hellebuck had the toughest environment in the league. As a matter of fact, the guys that had the toughest environments are guys that are getting roasted in a lot of areas. Sergei Bobrovsky had one of the toughest environments in the NHL. Carey Price had one of the toughest environments in the NHL. Jacob Markstrom had the 9th toughest and outperformed it by a significant margin, which is why, he should get consideration for the Vezina ahead of a guy like Andrei Vasilevsky, who I guarantee you the GMs are going to give a finalist spot to. Although I've had enough goalie coaches call me to ask about these numbers in the last 2 or 3 weeks that I know some GMs turn to their goalie coach on this, that I think being able to see some of these things might change a few votes. I doubt it's going to be enough to take Vasilevsky out of a finalist spot. And don't get me, Andrei Vasilevsky last year should have won the Vezina. First in terms of the goals saved. He was great, and they weren't as good defensively as we think. This year, he's in the mid-20s. How you give it? I know he led the league in wins. Louis Domingue, who is barely in the league a year later, won 11 straight games behind the Tampa Bay Lightning. If you are judging on wins who the best goalie is, you're doing a disservice to the position. And as good as Vasilevsky is, he was mid-20s in the NHL in terms of comparing his actual numbers to his expected. I know he finished on a heater. I know he had the most wins. But if you give a guy a Vezina finalist nod when he's in the mid-20s, like, what are we even doing here? And it's okay. I will say in the same sentence that Andrei Vasilevsky is one of the best goaltenders in the NHL. But that doesn't mean he had the best season. Those two things can coexist. It's okay I do believe he's one of the best goalies in the NHL, but he didn't have a great season. And it wasn't just because the team started slow. He wasn't good behind them either at the beginning. So to then give him a Vezina finalist nod is, like, to me, that's voting on reputation and surface numbers that frankly show you haven't done your homework or your team doesn't invest in the analytics enough to actually know.
Right. Fair. So let's look at the Vancouver-Minnesota series, and we'll start with Markstrom. And where are you at with him? What are you expecting? He's had the advantage, I guess you can use that word, as he's been able to skate in Sweden. What are we? And he's coming back from injury. What are you expecting or hoping that we see from Jacob Markstrom when we get back to training camp in a week or so?
I mean, again, who knows, right? But the advantage of getting to skate in Sweden, when we talk about guys coming back, because to me, this is like coming off an off season. We're 3 months now, right? So, and the advantage of him being able to do the things in Sweden that he would normally do in an off season to get prepared to play. Like, I've had a lot of guys that are just like, that is a massive, I cannot overstate how big an advantage that is compared to guys who are stuck at home, right? And riding a bike. And a lot of guys watch video of themselves playing to try and get their mindset. Like, they would watch the video and go mindside on it and try and literally watch the video and be like, okay, the puck's moving down the left point, kind of feel it in their body to capture that feeling. And he's out there stopping pucks like he normally would in August heading into a training camp. That is a huge advantage. I don't know how much of that he's going to lose once he lands, which I think actually is today from Sweden here in Vancouver, because there seems to be some uncertainty. But if it really is a 14-day quarantine once he gets here, and he really is stuck in the hotel for 2 straight weeks and can't go out and skate, I got to think some of that advantage starts to disappear. And is the 2 weeks in training camp with Ian Clark enough to ramp it back up to the same level? Again, we're in uncharted territory. Everyone is. But at least some of that advantage starts to disappear if the quarantine is truly 2 weeks and he truly can't step on the ice I mean, actually, I think that would take him actually after the start of training camp.
Yeah,
so,
I was thinking because it's Wednesday's the 1st.
Yeah, so this is Carey Price too, right? He talked to the media. We knew he was in Washington. We talked to him, but he talked to the media in Montreal on Thursday and talked about making plans to go back to Montreal. Hadn't seen a shot yet down there, and that was 15 days before training camp. But if he's coming from the States to Canada, that's a 14-day quarantine. So again, there are a lot of questions that we don't have answers to here. Especially in terms of whether they'll allow them to sort of whatever they call it, the buddy quarantine, where as long as they're with other guys who have come from the same area, they can actually get out and skate. But it will be. I expect nothing but good things from Jacob Markstrom. He was exceptional out of the gates this season, so he sort of checks that box in terms of being able to get off to a hot start. His off season, so to speak, was less interrupted than others because he could skate. The changes that he's made in his game under Ian Clark have taken hold. They are significant, but they've become instinctual for him. That's the thing. When you make changes and you're repping things out in practice thousands and thousands of times to get comfortable with it, there's a period there where you're thinking about it. And when you're on the ice, you really just need to react. And all those things you've been working on need to start happening instinctually rather than being something you think about it. And I think he's hit that point, especially the net play, his use of what Clark calls reverse tracking. I think a lot of other guys call it a double seal, where plays behind the net. You'll see him like a pad on each post. He's exceptional at that now. And that was something he didn't even have in his game a year and a half ago. So I expect Jacob Markstrom to be the Jacob Markstrom we saw this season, as much as you can expect anything under these circumstances. And I think that bodes well for the Vancouver Canucks because he was exceptional. The one question mark I do have is, we've heard here in Vancouver about the coaching staff. And to be fair, every market is probably having the same conversation. These are the types of conversations where it becomes a big headline in your market. And then when you read around the league, every staff is talking about the same thing, because everyone's had time. So they dig in on this and they dig in on that and they do the extra work and everybody gets excited about what it could mean on the ice. And it's like, okay, we changed it. We took a deep look at our systems and we might change some of our systems or tweak some of our systems. Well, you don't think the other 30 teams also took a good look at what was working and what wasn't working during this extra time, right? So, but we've heard a lot about it in Vancouver. And I have there's a little apprehension from the goalie side, because Jacob's success was based on how they play. He was comfortable in that environment. It may not have been a great environment defensively, and it wasn't. Like I said, 9th worst in the league. But he was comfortable and he performed in it. If you change that environment, there's two factors here. They are a high shot team. They give up a lot of shots. A lot of those are easy shots. They're right when they say, a lot of the shots, there's some nights where we go into the post-game scrum with Travis Green. He's like, we gave up 40 shots, but most of them were from the outside. And everyone in the media is kind of like, there are also a lot from the slot off, backdoor passes and yada, yada, yada. And he's right. There actually are a lot of both. And one of the biggest, Jacob Markstrom's numbers, why he grades out so well, gave up no bad goals. Almost none. Best in the NHL in terms of the amount of bad goals, what we call low percentage shot goals. He was the best. And so all those shots from the outside, what they do as a goalie, those easy shots, if you're handling them, they make you feel really good about your game. We talk about rhythm and timing and how those are elements that guys might struggle to find after so much time off. Those shots help you get rhythm and timing. I know other teams, Carolina is famous for it for years. Their goalies would watch them throw these easy shots at the net at the other end. They're a great Corsi team, but they're what we goalies call 99%ers. I'm stopping them 99% of the time. Carolina's goalies would watch their offense do this at the other end. And they're like, holy crap, we're warming this guy up. I haven't seen a shot in 5 minutes, and we just spent the last 5 minutes warming this guy up, with these absolute muffins from the outside, throwing pucks on net. I know it works at times, but without traffic, without disrupting sight lines, all you're doing is making the other goalie feel good. And the Canucks gave up a lot of those shots, and Jacob Markstrom felt good, and he played good. So the only question I have at this point about Jacob Markstrom and his long-term performance, because we haven't seen it. I'm not saying he can't, but we haven't seen it. There have been a few examples that put a few doubts into my head, is how he handles a low-shot environment, how he handles a night where he doesn't get those feelers. Some goalies are great when they're busy and not so good when they're not. And I don't think we've had a chance. And I used to joke, well, the way the Canucks are structured, we're not going to have to worry about getting this answer anytime soon, is whether Jacob Markstrom can be a good low shot goalie. So changing the system in that regard, but also changing the system in terms of the reads you make as a goaltender are such a crucial part of your game. And they are based on trust. Not just that you know the system, you trust that you know the system and where guys are supposed to be, but trusting that they're actually going to be there. So making any significant changes to how guys are supposed to play, where they're supposed to be on the ice, involves me as a goaltender processing things differently, but also being able to trust that the other guys have processed it well enough to be where they're supposed to be. And at some point, it just becomes instinctual, and you're just reading and you're following the puck and you're tracking the puck and you're going where it goes. But there are read elements that factor in. And so to change all of those on short notice, and again, I think sometimes the media gets excited. Oh, they've changed the systems and they've looked at this and they make it a big story. I don't know how much is actually going to change. But to make significant changes, if they actually do, and Travis Green's an incredibly smart man, and I know he would have looped in Ian Clark on these discussions. They have a very collaborative group, so they're not going to come into camp and hey, Clark, your goalie's got to totally change how they play. We've switched from man to man to zone within our how we defend our defensive zone. I don't think it would be like that. Then again, we've seen other teams like that. That change in particular for goalies, for some reason, is one that does work. We saw it with the St. Louis Blues halfway through the season. Coaching change, got rid of Hitch, went from playing sort of a man-to-man system in their own end to going to more of a zone system, and the goalies' numbers skyrocketed. So it can work on short notice. It's just something where we're all expecting Jacob to come back and be this guy, but if we change the environment in front of him, can he be that guy? Because that's a bigger ask. We got all these other uncertainties. Plus, hey, guess what? We're changing how we play in front of you. You figure it out.
Right.
Yeah, and then with Minnesota, we've got quite an interesting situation with Dubnyk and Stalock, and Devin Dubnyk ended up having to take a leave of absence from the Wild for a little bit, and trying to figure out what to expect from them is going to be a little bit more complicated.
Massively. And not just because, you know, is it going to be Doobie? Is it going to be Stalock? And I think, you know, as much as that's been Devin Dubnyk's team for years, you'd be fooling yourself. If you looked at the numbers this year, you know, chances are we're going to see Alex Stalock out of the gates, at least based on the way the season ended. If the season had ended and then gone straight into playoffs, Stalock was the guy. He was running like 920 over the last, whatever period of time. He was playing really well. But it's not just you got to figure that out. I'm not sure. Trying to think of around the league. I'm almost confident saying this without running through all 30 teams. I don't think that there is a bigger contrast in goaltending styles on the same team than what the Minnesota Wild have Devin Dubnyk and Alex Stalock. Different size goalies for sure, but in terms of how they play and how you might try and break that down or target that, in terms of, you know, a pre-scout and types of areas to go after, they are night and day. Alex Stalock is like an unmade bed sometimes. He's got a little Timmy Thomas in him. He's super aggressive, comes out on the rush, battles everything. There's a lot of rhythm and timing and feel in his game. And question marks about, to me, that's the one thing. We talk about goaltending is a sliding scale, right? Like between technique and feel and rhythm, and some guys are more on the technical side, some guys are less. And the guys that tend to move more and rely more on rhythm and timing, to me, they're usually ill-suited for the backup role, which is why I'm not surprised that Stalock's numbers as a pure backup have been okay, but that he's succeeded now that he's got a chance to run with the ball, because that style is sort of, you need that. You need to get into that rhythm and timing because your game is so freaking reliant on it. Whereas Doobie's just like position to position, plays super deep, relies on his size. His movements are much more controlled, much more contained. So, you know, like totally opposite in terms of how, like just polar opposite. I'm not sure you can get Stalock back to the way he finished the season in this short of time, but we'll see. Doobie, as you mentioned, had an incredibly tough season personally. There were elements of his game that made him successful for the past number of years that, frankly, he lost. they disappeared. His tracking into movement, a lot of things that he had developed as what I thought were the foundation and core of his game. And full disclosure, I ran a hot stove at Hockey Canada's Program of Excellence just a couple of weeks ago to wrap up the week of POE that they ran with all the World Junior kids, and been involved in that program a little bit. And Doobie was one of the guests that we had on. And he talked about this, about losing the foundation. And for him, it started in his stance. And once his stance disappeared, once he sits down, and everything else flows from there. His movement, instead of just staying on top of pucks, everything is open and closed. And I worked with a consultant that works with him and did some video looking back over his season, and it was gone. It was like not the same goalie that I'd watched for the past couple of years. And so the question becomes, it was understandable given everything that happened. And he stayed in Minnesota last summer instead of coming back to Kelowna, which he normally does to do the work with this consultant. That's where I go up to. It's what's going to be interesting is now that he's recognized it, he can see it. He's seen it on video. Does he have the ability can he get back to it that quickly? And, I think it's possible. I'm not going to say it's going to happen, but I think it is possible. And if he gets back to doing the things that made him successful, and really when I talk about it, it's as simple as starting with his stance and that structure. If he can make that adjustment and hold on to that adjustment, and I would suggest it's probably easier to hold on to it in a 5-game series than over the course of a season with all this stuff flying around you, family and leaving the team and all those elements. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Devin Dubnyk. So there are a lot of uncertainties there, not just in terms of who you're going to face, preparing for two totally different styles in your pre-scout, but the style that Stalock plays makes the fact that he's the number one going in probably harder to maintain after all this time off. There's just so many question marks there. And I wouldn't be surprised if the answer everybody thinks is the answer now is not the answer by the time we start playing games, or certainly 1 or 2 games into it. At the end of the day, if you're the Canucks, neither guy's performance, even though Stalock was great at the end, the Wild haven't been beating anyone with goaltending, let's put it that way. And so if you're the Canucks, you certainly hold an advantage in that regard this season.
And the other fascinating thing too is you have a coaching change from Bruce Boudreau, more offensive, to Dean Evason, who we're learning a little bit more about, which you talked a little bit about adjusting a game and what Travis Green to do. I don't know if that's an advantage or a disadvantage, but we sort of know what Dean Evason is about, but we don't really know what Dean Evason is about. And that, what tweaks will he make with this pause in his game as well?
Yeah, no, I don't have those answers right either. So, again, it'll be fascinating. As much as we have these headlines about the Canucks digging into their systems, you're absolutely right. They've done the same in Minnesota. They've taken a look at it. And interestingly enough, one of the things that Bruce did before getting fired, actually about halfway through last season, they were actually playing really well. Their goaltending was really good. But he didn't they were giving up a lot of shots, but they were not hard shots. They were clearing lanes. They're letting their goalies see it. The goalies were having success. It was looking good, but the coaching staff felt like it was too many shots. So they started collapsing. They started, sort of collapsing into the house and taking away shots. Their shot totals went down, but they started creating lanes that their goalies weren't seeing through, and pucks that were, ricocheting off bodies. And what was the word that Marty Berger used once towards the end of his career? The grenades. I remember he said it was grenades going off everywhere once we went back to a shot blocking mentality in the house. And I think their goalies saw a lot of that. And so it was kind of one of those interesting things where on raw shot totals, all of a sudden the coaching staff felt they're giving up too many shots, but in an effort to not give up fewer shots and change the system, they kind of submarine their goaltenders. And so I don't know what changes, they're going to make coming out of that. Have they looked at that? Have they gone back and taken a look at how costly that actual shift was as a team to the performance of those goaltenders? And can they flip a switch back to what they were doing before in terms of, rather than collapsing into lanes, allowing their goaltender to see through those lanes and trusting them? I don't have that answer. But I would suggest that if they did do that work and saw that trend and were able to flip that switch with their team quickly enough, you would see a better performance from the goaltenders for sure.
One final question for me, and it's around, and I'm touching wood as we're doing this. Yes, it's my head. But heaven forbid let's hope this doesn't happen, but I think I do think that this is an important question. If there has to be a pause or a suspension during this for a lengthier or a short period of time, from a goaltender's perspective, is it something that they can switch on or off? Or has there been discussion around how from a goaltending perspective to deal with this? Is it just like, well, we're having an off season, or it's no different than what we've been through? What's been going through the goaltenders' minds with that? Is that,
you mean in terms of we start and stop, like have to stop for another couple of weeks and then get going again, or there's a couple of pauses, that type of thing?
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I haven't had a single guy bring that up. I think they're just trying to get back to that starting gate and hoping it doesn't happen. I think goaltending especially is all about, like, there's a golf tie in there. I always make it, like, there really is. Like, the way a golf swing has been broken down with slow motion video and everything, like, that's how we treat goaltenders now, like right down to biomechanics. But there's also mentally, there's that one shot at a time mentality that we hear golfers talk about all the time. You can't project into the future. You can't think about the last shot because it's going to screw up your ability to deal with the shot in front of you. That is very much what goaltenders are trying to achieve when they're in the net. And they go to great lengths, whether through superstitions or through real, like, sports psychologists taught, application within a game. A lot of these things that we see as quirks within a game, whether it's Braden Holtby and Carter Hart squirting the water bottle and finding a droplet and like one droplet and watching it all the way till it hits the ice. Even guys skating, these are taught mental things to keep them in the moment. So with all the stress of these past 3 months and the uncertainty, I think for sure the focus right now is on getting into that one shot at a time mentality. I don't think anybody's thinking about what happens if we have to stop. Maybe when they're having these, like, what happens if we have, like, the big picture discussions with the PA,
right? But
not in terms of the granular, how will it affect me as a goaltender?
Okay.
I haven't thought of it either, but top of my head, if it's a week or two, your goaltender, again, I go to past experience. The goaltender that has maybe had some time as a backup, where he's had to not play for a week or two because that was the job, and then come in and be sharp. And that's a real tough mental thing, right? Like that's a tough one because it's not just, I haven't played in 2 weeks, I don't have the feeling, but what can wander through your head is, God, if I don't play good tonight, I'm not going to get to play for another 2 weeks. And you can't have that. You can't succeed if those thoughts are there. The guys who have been through that experience and learned to process that type of emotion and been able to channel their game after being off for a while. And sometimes there are technical elements. Again, guys who move less, who are a little more sort of spot to spot rather than back, come out and backwards flow and that type of stuff. They rely less on the rhythm and timing that would be disrupted by a start and stop. So all of those elements would weigh in. I would think that, a quieter technical goalie and a guy who's actually been there, done that in terms of having to start and stop every 2 weeks, that's where I would lean. But if you've got a number one, if Alex Stalock's on an absolute heater when they have to hit pause again, and he's flowing and he's flopping and he's diving all over the place, and none of this fits his game, you're not going to go away from him. So, but experience-wise, that's the type of goaltender that would fit that.
Now, moving into the Flames and Winnipeg Jets, it's you got a little bit of a mirror image for the Canucks and Wild series, where you have the Jets with Connor Hellebuck, bona fide number one, and then with the Flames, you've got more of a tandem that you don't know exactly which way they're going to go. Just depends on who comes into camp and looks the best, I guess. Yeah, and again, I think that's going to be on the goaltending coach, Jordan Sigalet, to really have a feel for that, right? Like, I know there's a lot of trust in David Rittich, and there's an undeniable talent there. I had goalie coaches, the year he was in the American League, I had goalie coaches that were like, and this is maybe not a fair comparison, but I had goalie coaches in other organizations that said there was a price-like element to a lot of his game. Like, that was the comparison they were making. They weren't saying he was going to be carried, because until you get up there and do it, but there were elements of his game they liked on that level. And I think a lot of people fall in love with the Big Save Dave, and there's a personality there.
that, I mean, as a fan, how do you not cheer for that, right? Like, he's just this there's a lot of good stuff there. But as a goalie, there's a lot of good stuff there too. And we've seen signs of it. I don't have the answer as to why he doesn't seem to be able to sustain it over a year. I think we do find out after the fact a couple of times here in a row that there's been an injury he was dealing with and playing through. And I can't tell you whether that's an injury that's really affected his play or whether being able to play through an injury is something he needs to learn, right? Because nobody gets through a season unscathed, right? And there are two different types, right? Are you hurt or are you injured? And I'm not saying either way, but clearly his inability to maintain the level he achieves early is a question mark. Siggy's going to know sooner than anyone else whether he's got the Dave that he's had in the early season. And if you have that guy, he's your guy, because he's been great. Like, you know, we get to the halfway point of the season the last couple of years, and, you know, he's a guy who should be in those, you know, at that point when you grade it out, like he's in the top 10, sometimes in the top 5 when I look at the analytics. You know, it's, the numbers are there. They fall off a cliff at some point each of the past 2 seasons. So I think what bodes well, like I said before, is the fact he gets there quickly and is able to achieve it. Like, you know, being really good for 2 months in a normal regular season isn't enough. Being really good for 2 months right now could be enough. And he's been able to do that. So, and again, we'll all come down to Siggy's going to be the guy that's able to see whether they have that guy. And same with Cam, right? Like, Cam's finished really well. I think Cam Talbot's a hell of a goalie, and is capable of giving you, obviously has shown in the past, capable of giving you that real high-level performance he was when the season ended. It's a nice option to have, but again, it's going to be on the goalie coach to figure out who's closer to that peak level in these strange circumstances. The other weird one, too, to me was, to be honest with you, really odd one, and you guys will have to keep an eye on this when he comes back, is David Rittich was trying, or if he made the switch to a completely different equipment company, or at least we saw signs of him on the internet getting new pads and trying them overseas back home. And this wasn't just a brand switch, which, I mean, hey, it is what it is. Guys switch all the time, but a totally different style of pad. Like, he went from a really soft, flexible pad that I would maybe associate with his style of game to a lot more rigid, you know, structured, like stiff pad. And from the outside, I kind of like, I like both of them, right? Like at Ingle Magazine, we're testing them all. We've done reviews on them all. We've, you know, like, and they're all really good. Both of these products that we're talking about here are excellent products, but they're very different in terms of what style they would typically fit. And the one he was trying, to me, I was like, is that really a Dave? Like, is that what I think of? And I'm not sure. If he feels good in it, that's all that matters. But honestly, that's you know, like making a change. It's not just the brand and the color and things like that. This was a significant change in terms of the style of pad. And I was curious about it. And that, you know, I mean, you look at different factors that can change things for a guy, maybe for the positive in this case. I don't know. But it's something that certainly I'm gonna be very curious to see what equipment David, and most people won't even notice it or know the difference, but I'm going to be really curious to see what equipment David Rittich steps on the ice in when he arrives back in Calgary.
Well, the one thing that when you were talking I was thinking a little bit about too, was looking back, and, you know, it was 10,000 years ago, it seems, but that game in Calgary against the Oilers on that hockey night in Canada, that was almost a turning point for him, because he certainly struggled after that game for February and March. And I almost wonder if this break, in a sense, could be a benefit for him to get that, whatever happened in that Edmonton game, whatever the reason was, out of his mind and just able to kind of move forward. Yeah,
I can't speak to whether that because obviously the emotion of that game, I didn't watch that game, right? Like, I was covering another game that night. So, but the emotion of that game and the fact that this all happened around that game for him, maybe got caught up in it, all those things, I don't know. But you're absolutely right. Anybody, like, I would argue that anybody who was sort of on a downward slope, this reset, they're going to view it as positive, right? And anybody who was on an upward trajectory is just going to be like, no problem, I can go back to that. But, like, you're going to use this as a mental reset. You're going to at least try and create that in your mind. So I think it's an absolute positive for him to have this break, because, like I said, he has been so good. The interesting thing to me about Rittich, like, where's the narrative in Calgary? You guys are going to know this better than me, like in terms of the environment in front of him. Because when I looked up his numbers, when I look up sort of high percentage shots, so these are like the tough ones, he was, and of course, as I say this, I have my computer decide it doesn't want to look them up for me, so my apologies. He was high percentage chances against this year, despite the fact that he shared a job down the stretch. He didn't have the same overall workload as a Carey Price or a Connor Hellebuck or a Sergei Bobrovsky or a Freddie Anderson. The amount of high percentage chances that David Rittich faced this year in Calgary was the sixth most in the league, behind those names I just listed, plus Braden Holtby. So the most amount of tough chances on the season, and again, this isn't percentage of entire chances, but just total hard chances. Price was the most, Hellebuck was second, Holtby was third, Bobrovsky fourth, Anderson fifth, and David Rittich sixth. I don't know if that matches the narrative there. And the interesting thing to me is the juxtaposition between him and Markstrom. Markstrom was about, I'm doing math in my head, 10th in terms of tough chances. Rittich was the sixth highest tough chances. He outperformed the expected on those saves by almost 13 goals. I look at that number and I'm like that's better than Price. That's way better than Holtby. You know, that's better than Hellebuck by 12. Like, tough chances. David Rittich is one of the best goalies in the NHL. Actually, he's the second best goalie in the NHL against tough chances this year. Where he got killed was on the low percentage chances, where he had some of the worst numbers. He was 13 goals below expected on low percentage chances this year, and like that just killed him. So as I sort of just, really good live radio here as I click around to get the numbers in front of me. Yeah, he was close to 12 goals. He was 87th in the NHL in terms of his performance against low percentage chances. That's murder. Like, you can't have that. We talked about Markstrom. The reason he was so good, he didn't give up any of those. Rittich gave up 34 goals on low percentage chances. Markstrom gave up 9. That is 25 goal difference. And the thing about low percentage chances, when your goalie gives one up, your team loses that game 87% of the time, unless the other goalie also gives up a bad goal. 87% of the time. So Rittich is great on the tough stuff. There's something there that when he falls off is not working on the easy stuff, and that kills him. And it's not just that it kills him statistically, but you guys know what it does to a bench when the bad ones start going in, right? And usually what happens too is guys try and do too much, like if it happens often enough, guys are like, we got to help our goalie out. We got to block that shot. But your job wasn't really to block that shot. Now you're not doing your job. So who's got the guy you were supposed to be on? And then that whole cycle starts to break down. I've seen it happen with teams. If you're not careful, it happens often enough. Pretty soon, nobody's doing their job. The goalie's trying to do the job that this guy's not doing because he's trying to help the goalie do his job. Nobody's doing their own job. The snowball gets rolling enough big downhill, and that's where you end up with your Steve Mason and Columbus situations, actually playing well, but he couldn't get a win. I remember him telling me after and then he goes to Philly and he just kills it. And I remember him telling me like that summer, yeah, I was playing the same way in Columbus, but it was I never would have had the turnaround in Columbus because the trust was the cycle was broken. I'm not saying they're there with Rittich. I'm saying another couple of years, maybe in another year like this, and you got to wonder because those low percentage goals are just killing him. On the tough stuff, he's one of the best in the NHL. On the easy stuff, right now, statistically, he's one of the worst. And that's a tough balance for a team to overcome.
Yeah. I think the one quick perception I will say, too, on that for, Sean can correct me if I'm wrong, but the observation seems to be tougher teams, games that mean something. The Oilers, the Canucks, some of the bigger games, David Rittich is there. But when it's not that same type of opponent, feels like David Rittich is off.
Yeah, and so maybe that's that's between the ears, not between the pipes. Because like I said, between the pipes, there's a lot of elements of his game that people like. And I haven't done the deep dive on his season where I can give you examples where you can say this is. Again, I can't see this. That's the one thing I hate it when guys say he's this or he's that mentally because I can't see inside the hood there. I don't know what's going on between his ears. I can totally tell you what's going on between the pipes. But sometimes there are signs, like I said with Markstrom, signs of positive. Even when he wasn't necessarily playing a style I like, he at least didn't abandon it. That was a check mark in favor of his mental toughness in a tough situation. I don't watch Rittich on a day-to-day basis to be able to give you those examples, to point to those road signs, in terms of what might be the problem. But at the end of the day, maybe that is it, and maybe it is about, finding that intensity. Sometimes guys have to find ways to manufacture that intensity. Or if you rely on that intensity for excellence, you have to find a way to be able to succeed at a more sort of balanced mindset. You shouldn't need to be, ramped up like 6 Red Bull ready to go to play your best, because it's not always easy to maintain that. You have to find ways to be able to play your best when, it's a 2 Red Bull night.
Right.
Because your heart will stop eventually if you keep doing the 6.
Fair.
Yeah.
Fair. Sean, did you have anything else you wanted to ask?
No, this has been absolutely amazing in terms of a deep dive into goaltending, and thank you so much, Kevin.
Yeah,
well, I'm just grateful that you guys both stayed awake. I think I didn't let you get a word in edgewise. We got through an hour, and I answered 5 questions. That's actually pretty good.
Hey, no, this was great. For those who are how can we follow you on Twitter?
Kevin is in goal on Twitter. In goal mag and in goal media on Twitter and Instagram is where we do a lot of our work. For in goal magazine, I tweet out my NHL.com articles, although obviously they've cut back on their freelance right now. I'm actually not sure if I'll be covering the Canucks series should we get there. I think a lot of us, there's some uncertainty about how this is going to work. But check it out on Twitter. Make sure if you're a goalie, if all this stuff I just said actually made sense to you and you didn't just totally glaze over as I got technical, check out In Goal Mag, In Goal Media. We have a subscription site there where we actually take goalies. Again, if you're not a goalie, this is going to mean nothing to you. But if you are a goalie, like I said, we've done live webinars with Carey Price and Braden Holtby during this time. We have teaching tips, drills, being on the ice. We've been running a series that I did with Roberto Luongo where I was on the ice with him for a week in Florida. And then he reviewed all the drill work he did with me on video under our new subscription called In Goal Premium. We've been breaking that out over the past couple of weeks. So you got a future Hall of Famer showing you how he approaches certain drills and little tips and keys. Basically, we're like an online goalie coach. But the difference is we've got NHL guys giving the tips. So, if you're a goalie, check it out.
Cool. All right. Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time, and we will hope to catch up with you soon.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys having me, like I said, and putting up with my verbal diarrhea.
Not a problem. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thanks.